Hello, my name is James Patrick Dunn. I go by Jim. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, really a small suburb of Oak Park, Illinois, which is right next to Chicago. I was born on March 29th, 1944. My parents were Patrick Dunn and Jane Dunn. I have one sibling, a brother, Daniel Dunn. So, a little bit about the Irish legend that I like to quote. The Irish legend has it that the oldest male in the household, the father, is not normally referred to by his formal given name, James, but rather himself. As in, if you're looking for himself, you will have to ask himself to find out. So, as the oldest male in the whole Dunn clan of my generation, basically, as well as a father, I can say, 'tis himself. That's me. And this is why I'm writing it to you. I hope that the story to follow, one that you're going to hear, tells of a noble purpose, generous service, work well done, and my love for God, family, and this great country, the United States of America. I thank my father, my family, the center of my life, who I dedicated this document to. I'm starting this as a personal goal. I started it way back in October of 1998. I will try and update it as I can, as I go along. This is meant to be a bit of a glimpse into your heritage through my eyes. That's why I call it To My Children's Children. I sincerely hope that God, oh yes, I do believe in God, will bless me with the opportunity to tell you personally much of what I'm about to say. Either way, here goes. I was born in, as I said, March of 1944 during World War II, which I hope you either study or did study in your history classes. I was born about 2 months before the invasion of D-Day, which again, I hope you have studied, when the United States invaded Normandy, France. Once World War II was over, the men and the women came home. Jobs began to get plentiful, and this country was about to see prosperity like it had never seen in its lifetime. So a little bit of background to James Dunn. Both of my parents were born prior to 1920 and the Great Depression, which was 29 to 33. During the years prior to my birth, their lives were influenced by a great industrial revolution. America began to explode as a real world leader. They were greatly affected by the Great Depression, and then just before their marriage, World War II broke out in Europe and Japan. Most men were drafted into the military service, and the women remained home to work in the manufacturing and production of goods to support the war effort. When the war ended, 1945, America began an era of prosperity that continues on into the 21st century. My parents witnessed the birth of television. They were part of the original communication boom, where everyone had a dial telephone, and you had to talk to an operator to connect to someone else. Hello, can you connect me to my Uncle Frank Dunn, please? His number is, that's how it used to be. They witnessed the origin of superhighways, tollways as we call them now, and the introduction of drive-in movies, as well as drive-through restaurants. Drive-in movies, a place where you would go into a big lot and there would be a huge screen and you'd watch a movie. There would be a little microphone in your car and you could hear what they were saying. That was living large. In my early years, they were introduced to television, mass transportation, mass production of the automobile, allowing everyone to own a car, and shortly thereafter, the expansion of the new middle class from the great cities of our country to the new and alluring suburbs. A place where everyone could own a home and a little piece of land. We called it, they called it, and we did call it, the American Dream. My parents were greatly influenced by these and many other changes that affected their lives, their beliefs, their morals, and economic growth that took place and ultimately affected my life in the 1950s and 60s, and then on into the 21st century. My father, Patrick Edward Dunn, he was born in Chicago on November 17, 1917, came from a rather typical Irish Roman Catholic family at the time. His parents, Patrick Dunn and Nora Dunn, emigrated from Ireland. My grandfather, Patrick Dunn, came from Leash County, L-E-I-S, called Leash County, Queensland, and my grandmother, Nora, came from County Cork in Ireland. They met and were married in downstate Ottawa, Illinois. They had 8 children, my aunts and uncles. The boys were Joe, Jack, Jim, I was named after him, but he died as a baby, Jerry, and my father, Patrick. The girls were Kate, Catherine, Mary, and Cecilia. All of the children, except Mary and Cecilia, which we knew as Aunt Sis, married and had lots of children, just like their mother and father. Mary and Sis became Catholic nuns in the Order of the Blessed Virgin Mary, BVMs, as they were called. My father was a first-generation American of Irish descent, which makes me a second-generation American of Irish descent. You may notice that I indicated American of Irish descent. I'm not Irish, I'm American of Irish descent. I'm proud of it. I'm proud of my Irish descent. I'm proud of where I came from and the people that worked hard and sacrificed to get me here, equally. My father had a great sense of humor and used to tell stories about how poor his family was. Well, of course, growing up with 8 children during the Depressions, they didn't have much, but they had each other. My father's stories were a mixture of truth and exaggeration, many of which made us laugh. They almost sound real. One of his favorite stories was how his family could only afford 1 pork chop, and his father would tie it from the ceiling above the dinner table when they ate, and they could all look up and make believe that they were eating a pork chop while they were probably eating some kind of stew or some kind of who knows what. But they thought they were eating a pork chop. So I grew up with lots of cousins, many of whom were named Mary and Michael and John, typical Irish names. No other Jims in my family. I don't know why. For some reason, I was the only Jim or James. However, I was the firstborn male of my generation, which in those days meant that I had the responsibility to carry on the family name. 2 of my father's 3 sisters, Mary and Sis Cecilia, joined the Catholic convent and became Roman Catholic nuns, Sisters of Charity of the BVM. So, as you might guess, I had a very strong Irish and equally strong Catholic upbringing. I never knew my grandpa Patrick. He was a Chicago policeman, and the family story was that he was killed trying to stop a runaway horse when my father was about 15 or 16 years old. Also, another young fable about my grandfather contradicted the horse story. Was while on patrol, he saw a young girl fall into the Chicago River. He jumped in to save her. It was so cold that he caught pneumonia and died. I've never been able to verify either of those stories, but they sound pretty good. My grandma Nora was a very slight woman who was very sweet and spoke with an Irish brogue, an accent. She died when I was only 13 years old. She and my Grandpa Pat are buried in All Saints Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. So as you can see now, I was named after my grandfather, father, and Uncle Jim. Uncle Jim died as a youngster. We're guessing at about 4 or 5 years old. Don't know why or from what. I don't know how he died or much about him. The family really never talked about him. My father, he was a medium-sized man, about 5'8", maybe about 160 pounds. He grew up on the west side of Chicago. They called it the Taylor Street area. And then his family moved to Division Street, up on the north side, Austin area. My father had to drop out of school in the 9th grade because that's when his father passed away. He had to go to work to provide for the family, for all the 7 siblings and mom. Because of his never finishing even high school, he held a great importance for education for his 2 sons. He knew that because of his lack of education, he was held back from achieving certain things in life. And he was not going to have that happen to either of his 2 sons. He was a very smart man. He had a lot of common sense, paid attention, knew a lot, liked to read, but never had that degree that was necessary to move up the ladder. Eventually, my dad went to work for the Commonwealth Edison Company, the power and light company in Chicago. He worked for Edison, as it was called, for 45 years until his death in 1974. My dad worked in the underground, splicing electrical wires under the streets of Chicago. He moved on to be a tree trimmer, one who worked in the alleys of Chicago, trimming the trees and keeping them from growing into the power lines. And lastly, he became a supervisor for the tree trimmers. He worked very hard, all of his life, to provide for his family. He always told my brother and me that he wanted us to go to school, get a good education, so we wouldn't have to work that hard all of our lives. Throughout most of my young life, he would tell me that your job, Jim, was to go to school and get a good education. I go back to that comment. Quite often he called me Jimmy. And to this day, most of my cousins who are still with us call me Jimmy. So I'm Jim, James, Jimmy. Pick one. To make sure that my brother and I received a good education, my father would volunteer to go to work when there was severe storms or various power outages or emergencies, so he could get time and a half of his pay to provide that we go to the Catholic schools. And we did. That cost extra back then. We could go to the public schools for free. That was covered by taxes. But he and my mom said we must be educated by the nuns. My father died in 1974 from a cerebral hemorrhage. He had fallen off the back of a truck and hit his head when he was a young man. Apparently, whatever damage he did at the time finally took his life. He was a very giving man who would always run when a member of the family or friend asked for his help. He was a fun-loving man. He enjoyed a cold beer, and not a lot, just 1 or 2 at the most, and he knew when to quit. He loved his family and devoted his life to his family, to us. Because of his upbringing, he had a very strong Catholic faith. He believed in God and attended church weekly. He made sure his sons had the same beliefs. He sent us to Catholic school. And at the time, as I said, it cost extra to go to the Catholic schools, or parochial schools as they were called. So it was a sacrifice both Mom and Dad made for my brother and I, and set a strong example every day of his life for us to follow. He was very active in the Boy Scouts when I was young, growing up. He was active in the Holy Name Society at church. He served as a union steward for the IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Both my dad and mom worked together to form the Austin Youth Club. This was in 1957 at a local police station in the Austin neighborhood. They worked with the local politicians to open a club for kids like me and my brother to go and have some supervised fun after school. My parents, through their hard work and effort, were able to get local businesses and civic organizations to donate items like games, toys, even a strong boxing ring to make for a special place for us boys to go. Unlike his brother, and as well as many young men during the 1940s, my father never went into the military service. He was hit by a bus before that and was injured, so he was not eligible for the draft. That's when men were taken into the military. His brothers all fought in World War II, except for the youngest, Gerald. He was too young, for World War II, but later fought as a U.S. Marine in Korea. It was because of the tremendous dedication of my mother and my father to each other and to their children that I grew to be the person I became. I had quite an example. They not only taught me the right from wrong, they lived it every day, every moment, every day of their lives. They were not afraid to say that they were sorry or they admit to making a mistake. My mom taught me to be independent and to be able to take care of myself. She taught me to wash clothes and clean a house and make a bed and manage money and go to work and earn it. She taught me to respect others, to love my family, my country, my God, and myself. That philosophy was prevalent just about everywhere I went. My school, my friends, my family, my church, most of us all kind of lived the same kind of life. We knew right from wrong. My parents were both wonderful people and wonderful parents. I am very, very fortunate. My father died on December 17th, 1974. He was only 58 years old. Too young. My father had quite a few sayings, as an Irishman, that he would use on a regular basis with us and some of his friends. His words of wisdom were truly just that, from a man who was never educated but had a tremendous amount of education. Here are just a few that I still remember, and somehow I use, and my children, my sons, still use them to me. One of his sayings, well, here are a couple of his sayings. God always helps those who help themselves. Always do your best. Even God doesn't ask for more than that. Live in hope and die in despair. That was his mother, my grandma Nora's favorite saying. He would say everything in its place and a place for everything. Very wise. When you go to visit someone, knock with your elbows. And I think I was probably 18 years old when I figured out what that meant. It meant you were carrying something, so you knock on the door with your elbows. How was I to know? He would say a poor workman blames his tools. The best thing a woman has working for her, a man's imagination. He would say this to me very often. My father was such a better father than your father. And he meant it. One of his best, and the ones that I always give to my kids and my grandchildren, the biggest room in the world, the room for improvement. And if you go through life with just one friend, you are a lucky man, James. But to have a good friend, you must be a good friend. And one of his favorite Irish sayings, speak when you're spoken to, come when you're called, shut the door after you, and talk to the wall. That was my dad, Patrick Edward Dunn. Now, just as an aside, you may see me using this tissue to wipe my mouth. quick side story. A number of years ago, I had cancer surgery on my neck, and because of that, my mouth has different things that work and don't work, and I'm constantly salivating. So that's why I'm doing this. I'm lucky. I'm still here. I think that will be enough for today's lesson. Tomorrow, or the next time we do this, we'll talk about my mother, Jane Dunn.